Hello, welcome to another episode of our nanoCHATs, and these are conversations with faculty members about particular areas of interest in teaching, and hopefully we'll get some good conversations started amongst the Ionic Viper community. My name is Hilary Eppley. I teach at DePauw University, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation, which is going to be on giving students feedback in a way that is manageable for faculty members. And I'd first like our participants to introduce themselves and say where they're from.
Hi, my name is Darren Achey. I'm at Kutztown University in Pennsylvania.
Hi, my name is Meghan Porter. I'm at Indiana University, Bloomington.
Hi, my name's Dave Benson, and I'm at Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to start on our comments on student feedback. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because I know I get bogged down in grading as much as the next person. And so I'm always looking for good ideas to be able to give students the kind of feedback they need to make improvements in the way they're studying and the way they're understanding concepts, but also keep my work to a reasonable level. And sometimes I know I let myself get a little out of hand on those things. So anyway, so let's start with our conversations. We'll start with Darren today.
So my example is maybe necessity being the mother of invention, where when we started submitting lab reports electronically. Prior to this, in my entire career, we've always, submitted hand reports, and all of my feedback would be by hand. And you find yourself getting tired of writing the same lengthy explanations maybe to students. And so, but you want to continue to give that feedback to everybody. You don't want to give just the good feedback to the first 5 reports and have it, dwindle down over time as you get worse. Well, so when we went to the electronic submissions, I figured it was an opportunity to change how I approached feedback on reports. And so, I made an established rubric, essentially, like I normally would do, but I started collecting all of the incorrect answers that students gave to questions or the ways that they did things a little differently. And I kind of outlined every single possible response that I would have. And at first, it might seem like that could be a lot of things. And the first couple, it did take quite a few to go through and write down all my possible responses. But I now have a Word document for each lab report that what I do is I paste it into the assessment part of our learning management system. And I essentially only leave in the comments that are applicable to a particular student. And this is kind of cut down, I would say maybe 30–40% of the time that I would take to grade a lab report, because it's cutting down on the time of retyping and typing the same things again and again. So that's my mini ad here to our group today.
So I have a comment or question about that.
Sure.
So how similar is the feedback you give from one lab report to another lab report? Like, are you able to recycle those comments frequently, or do you feel like each lab report you need a new set of comments to be able to give appropriate feedback?
So it's actually a great point that the very first one I did, obviously you had to go from scratch, build everything. But a lot of things like the formatting of graphs and tables and all of the little things that you look for there, I mean, more or less that stays the same from lab report to lab report, or even kind of structural components of an introduction, those kinds of things stay the same. So yeah, a good portion of each of these rubrics was similar for each lab report. So it wasn't like building from scratch for all of them. As you go through, of course, post-lab questions tend to be separate and different, but yeah, there was a lot of overlap as well. So that actually made that process easier over time.
That's good to know.
I have it as someone who this is going to make me sound really lucky. I don't grade my lab reports in my class, right? Because they're a little larger. But I have usually around 5 to 8 TAs that have to do all the grading. And of course, then you get the students who say, my AI is harder. We call them AIs. My AI is harder. Mine was easier. It's not fair. But what I like about your method is, even if I just did that the first time, I could provide that same document to my AIs And we can keep that even in a Google Drive, right, where they can be adding to it, but then the feedback across students will actually be more consistent regardless of their AI. So I think it's great for our larger classes too.
Yeah, I guess I'm wondering how you can use this to build up your rubric, right? As clearly you're getting information on these different ways for people to go off the road, right? Is that, and then does that also inform the way that you build out your rubric for students, and do the students sort of get to see that rubric ahead of time?
So they always see a kind of broad rubric for sure, and it has some of those general tenets that are in there. I do think for students, maybe the graphs is a good example. So
Right.
if a student gets a lot of points off on a graph, like this is very common for me. The first time they submit a lab report, no axes titles, they have no scientific notation and all kinds of things like that. And one of the things that does happen is, the students that look at the feedback, which you can also check now because it's a learning management system as opposed to handing it back on paper, those students effectively fix those problems immediately. So they're not seeing the rubric necessarily, but they're seeing the part of the rubric that applies to their issues, So I do think that has proven itself to help for students that wish to look at the feedback at least.
Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, Megan?
Sure. So as I kind of alluded to, I teach really large classes, so around 200 and up to 700. So the sustainable part's really important for me. And since moving online with online quizzes, one of the things, kind of even with lab reports, what Darren was saying, you're typing the same thing over and over and over. And so instead, what I started doing for feedback was I created my key for any given quiz. I also have about 20 different versions of every quiz question for like academic misconduct issues. So writing all of that in one key was almost impossible for students. But what I was able to do was take a snapshot of the math, like how, if it was a math-based question or the explanation. And in Canvas, when I was building the quiz, I would put that in the feedback box. So I didn't even have to type it out. It was just a screenshot and I could dump it in. They're now all saved as images. So when a student looks at it, they're getting the personal feedback for their version, but I'm not having to retype it. And so even if they got points off for something, I'm not having to, correct it. And I'm actually going to keep my quizzes online. So it's something I plan on using, going forward. And then in each of those, I've also added whatever practice problems or discussion worksheets, wherever we had seen problems of that type before, I'm actually noting those numbers or those activities in with the key, so that students are making the connections, partly so they know it's worthwhile. My homework's not graded, so it's worthwhile for them to do, but also to help them look at how some of these things connect, how we're making the jumps in knowledge. And then the second thing I added, which Canvas allows us to do this. You can also do it in Excel. So if you don't have Canvas or your system doesn't do it, for every assignment, I can send feedback in a bulk message to people based on their grade on the assignment, whether it's a quiz, an exam, even just lecture attendance. So after every assignment, I just send a bulk message to people above a certain cutoff and below a certain cutoff, and I can give them that feedback. If they didn't do too well on it, hey, come see us, or just so you know, this topic's really important for the next one, so let's get you caught back up. And for people who are doing great, just that note of encouragement. But I found that it has really helped, especially students who are doing really well, because they come back and tell me they don't usually get notes of encouragement, because we tend to be like, oh, you're doing great, keep it up. They don't usually get to hear that. And then for students who aren't doing so well, it keeps them from getting, that 4 quizzes in and somehow it doesn't register that they're not doing very well. And now it's getting to the point where they're going to have to dig themselves out of the hole. But since it's in bulk and Canvas can do that for me, it's actually pretty quick to do after every assignment.
So Megan, how have students responded across like your kind of spectrum? So you kind of noted some of those top end students, how they have appreciated getting comments, but like if you're having comments across the whole spectrum, are you getting feedback from students across the entire grade spectrum of how they're doing, and how do they feel about the feedback that you're giving to them?
Yeah, so one thing I make sure to do, and this came from a student's feedback to a friend, and then my colleague relayed that to me, where she had sent a bulk message that was really impersonal. So you could tell it was just a bulk to everyone, like, you didn't do so hot. And so one of the things I've tried is in my message, even though it's sending to everyone, they don't see that, right? It's a personal to them. So I make sure to say like, hey, I noticed that you, and I try to use really personal language in it. When students have said that that has made them feel a little bit more comfortable coming to reach out to us. And then I also have made sure in those messages to say, you know, this is a connection point, or, you know, this is where we're moving with material. And so they realize, I've had a couple students say like, you know, in other classes, I've been able to just ignore that quiz and move on. And so they said it was helpful because I didn't do this the first semester, and a student wrote back that it would have been really helpful to realize how much the material connected, because they approached it as like, oh, I bombed that quiz, that's fine, I'll just make it up on the next one. And then they bombed the next one because it was dependent on the material on the first one. And so I've had a lot of students come back and say like, they appreciate knowing where the course is going, and just knowing that somebody's kind of not watching them, that sounds creepy, right? But keeping an eye on them before it gets too bad. And that's something that I've had students tell me they appreciate it. I will admit, I started with the emailing encouragement first because I felt badly sending messages saying like, you didn't do so well. But now that I forced myself to start doing it, the response from the students has been positive.
Yeah, Megan, I just had a sort of a follow-up to that response. Did you see a significant, how much of an increase in participation levels do you see with students that are struggling by this method? I would imagine you see something significant given the sort of that personal. I really like that idea of the personalization of your response.
One of the biggest increases I've seen actually aren't mine. I call them student hours instead of office hours, but they're not at mine. I have undergrad teaching assistants that help in our classes because they're so huge. And some of them also hold office hours. And actually I've seen a huge increase at their office hours. And students have said, oh, like Dr. Porter sent this. And so, you know, they might still be intimidated to come to mine. And especially some of my students don't like Zoom because like your face is on that screen, right?
Right.
But they said, oh, Dr. Porter reached out and said this, so I figured I'd stop by yours. So we've seen a really good increase in theirs. All my undergrads have plenty of students each week at theirs, which is awesome. And in class, I haven't gotten a chance as much to try it in class because we haven't done it since we've been face-to-face, but I have about one teaching assistant for every 2 groups on Zoom. And so I have enough that they're always, you know, helping students participate anyway. So, you know, we'll see how it works when we're back face-to-face.
Gotcha.
Would say anywhere they're getting help is a good thing.
Right.
Right.
Exactly.
Exactly. All right, Dave.
All right. So my little tidbit is follows both of these previous ideas here. Since we moved online last spring, I've had the option to go back to in person. But I've been very interested in sort of leveraging classroom management system with quizzes, and I've actually moved my quizzes that I have, being in a smaller classroom environment. I've had the option to do a print quiz before, and then have students turn that in, and that's always taken up a decent amount of instruction time. So I've moved that to online classroom management system. 3 questions, and I've really had to focus in on this to come up with what are the 3 important takeaway messages from my previous class time, and how can I code a preferably maybe a multiple choice question or something that I can build out as even like a numeric answer, but that I have the option to do feedback on that, so that I could I'm very interested in sort of applying now what Megan's talked about in her message, or Darren's also, with that specific personalized feedback that can come in, and have that after every lecture. And then I start the next lecture with the solutions. It's not randomized because it's a low stakes quiz, right? It's not really a quiz, right? It's just sort of getting that feedback. I'm getting the feedback from students at that point. I'm providing feedback back to that students in a generalized fashion at the start of the next time that we meet, and also offering up time for discussion on where students might have got that wrong. Typically, students aren't engaging with me at that. Maybe it's a post-COVID thing at this point. But it certainly opens up that avenue for students to ask the questions after class or online afterwards.
I like your the doing it at the beginning of class. I think do you notice that cuts down a lot of time on trying to disseminate those responses to students?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, doing the response at the start of class is really helpful. It helps them sort of, and it's sort of that connection thing, right? Students have really appreciated, oh, I had to do this because we need to know this piece before we can move on to this next piece. And it sort of strings them along from one lecture to the next lecture of why that's important. But I will say it's taken me a bit of time to bring this system up. Bringing it up from zero, I'd start with pulling off questions straight from the textbook. If you can pull that out, they're usually easy and right at that level to be implemented. But then slowly, don't do every lecture, right? Maybe choose doing 1 lecture a week, 2 lectures a week. And then once you've built that up, then you can think about, it's only now that I'm thinking about putting in comments and formative feedback into the classroom management system.
I like that. I do something similar in that in my intro class, we have a kind of a flipped format where they're sort of reading slides beforehand and then doing a quiz. But I kind of like the idea of following up like afterwards. So you say you don't like do different versions of questions. Is that true? I have found that things get out there, right? And
Oh, sure.
and or you have a large number of people working together and they all have exactly the same, one of them gets it wrong and then the other 4 get it right. And I struggle with the, it is low stakes, but is that, is that a good thing that at least they're working through it, or I don't know.
I do have it timed. So I put a time limit on it of 10 minutes. And I guess this is, one of those great pedagogical rabbit holes. How much do I worry about my students copying on a low stake quiz? Because at that level, they're copying an answer, right? And they're still engaging with the problem and they're still trying to come up with the correct answer. Certainly I have, maybe this is just, a statement about the great students that we have at Calvin, but I see enough wrong answers to know that they're not all copying the correct answer.
I would agree with that. I hate for a small subset to be,
Now,
when I've done online tests, yes, I've randomized and I've done all the extra work. I've ran it through, Googled the question, ran it through Chegg, all that extra stuff that we have to do these days.
Yes, yes.
I actually have a question for it, because you were talking about being low stakes, and then Hilary mentioned, some people will just do it together. Do they only get 1 shot at it, or is it something where like they might get 2 chances that might lower that temptation to, copy of somebody else? Or
yeah, I mean, I wrestle with those settings on Moodle to apply. I usually do a single shot, but I also give them the year of Jubilee that they can go back and redo things, right before Thanksgiving. They can go back and, they know that it's, if they dropped one, I'm like, we're going to have enough that I'm going to be dropping. You'll be fine, right? So it does, having that small classroom environment certainly helps ease the anxiety associated with these quizzes.
Excellent. All right, I want to thank all of you for our great conversation today, and I ask our listeners or watchers to tune in for more nanoCHATs in the future. But thank you very much. I know I have some new ideas to take back to my classes, and wish you all well today. Thank you.